CEOs. I work for CEOs and I have great rapport with them, but I'm not changing how I communicate. I'm not trying to communicate like them. I'm not trying to communicate in the way that they think, their perception of how a female leader should communicate. In the book, I talk about this time where I was in a meeting and I was presenting and trying to talk, and there's a number of men. There's some women in the room, but there's a number of men, and they were all talking. They were talking over me and having a conversation with each other when I was the one presenting this conversation. And it was frustrating. I kept trying to jump in and they just kept talking over me. And when you give an idea, you had reasons for providing that idea. Don't just state the idea. I always tell people, think about your financial situation as well, because some people just want to leave and jump, but then you're hurting yourself financially, and you got to be careful about doing that, right? There was one company that I worked. Every day I drove in and said, I can't wait for it to be the last day that I have to drive in here. If you're saying that every day on your drive to work, that is not a great place to work, right?
Kae, welcome to the Made Leader podcast. I'm so glad to have you on today.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate you having me on the show. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So, Kae, for the listeners, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kae Kronthaler-Williams. I'm a marketing executive in the tech industry. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I'm an author of the book Not Made for You,
which is coming out November 5th. So excited to see that come out into the world. But what is the biggest lie we tell women about leadership?
I like that. I think the biggest lie that we tell women about leadership is that it's a level playing field. So we can come and work really hard, develop our skills, show up, and we'll advance. But the reality is we're working in a system that wasn't built for us. And there's bias in the promotions, our sponsors, and what leadership looks like, right? Yes. And so it's not about competency, which we typically think when we come in and we start our careers. We think that we just have to work hard and make sure we master our profession, and that's it. But that isn't it. It's also about navigating politics, networking, and what that definition of a leader looks like. And typically those things are a disadvantage to women in these systems, right? And we have to redefine what leadership is to like help shape.
Tell me more about that when you're saying that the model of leadership or the definition of leadership doesn't quite fit. Tell me more about that. What do you mean?
Some of it's about behavior, like how we lead. I know I lead differently. How I network differently. So for example, if you think about in these spaces where men feel comfortable, they're male dominant spaces, right? And men feel comfortable talking to men. And so they'll have conversations, and I'm being a little stereotypical here, but about sports in the hallway. Well, sometimes those conversations lead to business conversations, or they're golfing together, or they feel comfortable going out for drinks together. And we're not included in those all the time, right? And so we don't get the visibility to special projects or that tidbit of information about business that somebody else gets. So that's where there's some of that is that bias. And then also just how we communicate. Women are, if I'm very direct, I'm aggressive. Or if a man's direct, they're a great leader, right? So it's those things where you start to see that bias, and it affects, how we're viewed and what the perception of a true leader is. And we're not typically considered that. We're not strategic, we're more execution, right? So all those biases come into play and affect how we get promoted, or if we get promoted.
I'm hoping that it's getting better, but clearly it's not. We're not making strides in that area. It still exists, especially tech, certain areas, right, of industry.
here's where I see it getting better. When there's more women in the room with men, you see that they start to appreciate our expertise because they're forced to, because there's more of us in the room. And so there is some hope, but at the higher levels, especially what I'm seeing in tech, it doesn't change much. I mean, you're being spoken over in meetings. You don't have the same credibility. You don't get the same support and guidance that men do. You don't.
Yeah. And it felt like that we were making progress in the whole COVID era, attention to how there weren't women or people of color in the room. And now I feel like it's going backwards. So
Yes,
we're at an interesting, I guess that's the word I'd use, but it seems more difficult as you're in the earlier stages of your career, maybe not have that confidence to push back. But what happened? When in your career did you start naming it and calling it out, especially when it's so subtle sometimes?
you're right. I think when you're younger, you don't have the confidence to call it out. Although I think I called it out sometimes when I was younger, and that's just part of my personality. I think it started happening more after my 40s, and some of that is age. You have more confidence, but it was also, I've been in tech for a long time. I worked in a number of different companies and a number of different cultures, and you can only see that happening so many times without recognizing that as much as you try and fit in, you're never going to fit in. So you have to call out the bias so they're aware of it, because sometimes it's not conscious, right? Some of the bias. And so you have to call it out. And I think that's what happened for me. I just started to get really frustrated with having to, prove myself more than the guy next to me who I knew I was potentially better at my job or smarter than, right? And always seeing these other people getting promoted. So that was the driver for me.
Okay, so I'm going to fumble through this question a bit because I just thought of it. So you said earlier, when not just the rooms weren't built for women, right? Women, and then how do you know when to try to fit in and when not to? Because there are times that you don't have to change yourself to fit in, right? Like, so how am I making sense? Like, how do you know when, all right, I just need to read the room and know what's going on versus you're turning into a different person or you're trying to fit in? Does that make sense?
Yes. And I think you hit it on the head. Like, reading the room is a critical skill for any leader and any woman to navigate these rooms well. I don't know if, I think women now don't try as much to fit in. But they're kind of a bull in a china shop sometimes on how they handle it, right? So you still have to be professional about how you go about this and earn your credibility and build your credibility in these rooms. But yeah, I think it's not about when you're not switching to, yes, I'm going to try and fit in here, or no, I'm not going to try and fit in. I think it's coming with your authentic self every time, but it's doing it professionally and in the right times, right? And learning how to navigate some of the barriers that you're going to see in these rooms, but doing it again in a very professional manner. I don't feel that I changed who I am, right? I didn't do that. I demanded the respect that I deserved, and I started getting it after a certain point in business.
Got it. So when you said bull in a china shop, some people just come in just kind of being that way. It just doesn't go over well. Like, so they'll go in and be very
you have to do it. Yeah, you can't be abrasive. It's not about being confrontational, right? It's about being strategic and persistent and professional in how you handle these situations.
We're going to get to some scripts in a minute, but one of the common pieces of wisdom, and it's one I give too, so please school me on this. You say that women shouldn't just manage up, right? They should rewrite the rules, challenge biases. But What's the difference?
Well, managing up can place the burden on a woman to adapt their behavior and how they speak and how they present, just so you're accepted and you fit in. But what you should be doing is challenging some of the bias that you see, like, calling out the inequities, advocating for fair policies, creating visibility for you and for others, and helping define what leadership and talent looks like. Because, when you're trying to managing up, of course, we all have to manage up to some degree, but not in a way that changes who you are and how you behave, because that's what this system requires. Managing up to, make your boss like you, so to speak, or advocate for you, is asking women to navigate like men navigate. And we can't, because we're not men, and they won't want us to either, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work, because, as we said, like, we can try and be aggressive or direct, not even aggressive. We try and be direct, and someone says we're aggressive, right? Mm-hmm. So you try and be like them, but it doesn't work, right? They don't like that behavior coming from a female.
Really struggling with this one, Kae. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
that I'm thinking through, because there is this piece of it, right? There is this piece that you have to manage up. So as the critical differentiator, you manage up in a way that is authentic to yourself, that you're not bending and twisting to be this other person, right? To play golf if you don't play golf. But it's also to call out biases and unfairness if you see them.
Yeah, it's helping define what leadership is, that it's not just one profile, right? I can be a great leader and still be my female self, right? Mm-hmm. And some, I do speak out about things, and sometimes men don't want that from a woman. But I have learned to still do that and build a rapport with my, with CEOs. I work for CEOs and I have great rapport with them. Mm-hmm. But I'm not changing how I communicate. I'm not trying to communicate like them. I'm not trying to communicate in the way that they think, their perception of how a female leader should communicate, right? I'm communicating the way I'm communicating, but I'm also doing things to ensure that I am a credible leader, so that they can start to see that women can be credible leaders as well.
Gotcha. Thank you for helping me through that one.
And it is about being professional and calm, mm-hmm. and knowing when and how to navigate those rooms. And so reading a room, as you said, we started this conversation, is really important to know how to do that.
Yeah, because if you get angry or passionate, right? Because men are always passionate, we're just angry. So if you do get angry, that's just one of the biases that are against us, that people telling you to calm down, people telling you to smile more. I have heard that so much, that other women have said, hey, you should really smile more, right? Definitely getting talked over, mansplained to. Mm-hmm. You have scripts in your book. And so can you take one of those many situations that women may be in and walk through one of your scripts to help them through it?
So there are many, and the book does address a lot of them. But one of the ones I would say that I would want to talk about is what I've seen happen a lot and have experienced is or a woman will may have an idea in the room, say something, and my boss or somebody will ask a man if they agree with that or not. So they ask you the question, but they want the confirmation and the real answer from a man in the room.
Wow.
And so that's risky for us because it devalues us. And my advice is I would bring that up, and you can do it very calmly. Even if it's your boss or if it's another colleague, you can go speak to them after and say, look, I noticed that when I bring things up in a meeting, you look for confirmation or affirmation from John in the room. And I've seen this happen a number of times. Can you tell me why that is? Like, am I not providing enough information? Why is that happening? Now, two things could happen. They could say, well, you're not giving me enough data. I like to have data. So that's good information for you to have, right? And that's a legitimate thing to ask.
Good feedback, yeah.
Right, great feedback. Or they could say, no, I don't do that, and not agree with it. And then you should say, actually, you do that. You do that. And it's harmful to me. It devalues me in front of my peers. And that's not good for me or for you. It's not good for the business. And so what could happen there is that they may still say that they don't do it, but they're going to be more careful the next time. They're going to be aware when they do it, right? And so it will diminish that happening more often.
So it's after the meeting, so it's timely, right? You want it to be after the meeting.
It can be after the meeting, or it could be in your next one-on-one. It depends on how blatant that is, right? So you could just do it in your next one-on-one, or if it's not your boss or a peer, who just, you could go to them and say, hey, look, I've noticed this a couple of times and it's really bothering me. I want to talk to you about what I feel that you're doing to me in these meetings and how it's affecting me. And just have the conversation calmly.
And also one-on-one. You don't want to call anyone out in the middle of the meeting. So I just want to point that out.
Right.
So what do you do when they don't say, when they're like, I don't do that, and kind of dismissive?
Just say, well, yes, you do. And here's what you just did. And I would repeat what just happened. And then say, and I'm letting you know that this just doesn't benefit either of us, and certainly devalues me in front of my peers, and leave it at that. You don't have to get them to agree with you. They just need to hear that what they're doing and you don't appreciate it, right?
Yeah. Gotcha. And then with the peer as well. So same conversation can be had for a peer, because there are sometimes peers that'll one-up you or try to, over-talk you and all of that.
Yeah. A peer, anybody you can have that conversation with. But again, you're doing it professionally. You're not confrontational. You're not coming in with emotion. You're very calm and you're a matter of fact. That's the approach that you have to take to do that.
Gotcha. Well, what if somebody is talking over you repeatedly in a meeting? Because that happens all the time. Would you interrupt them in the meeting? Would you just say, hey, look, I'm trying to talk here?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So Kamala Harris was famous for, I'm speaking and putting up her hand and keep talking. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Not at all. Or, you can say, I'm speaking, you'll have your chance in a moment. Let me just finish my thought here. Absolutely. You can do that in a meeting. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, in the book, I talk about this time where I was in a meeting and I was presenting and trying to talk, and there's a number of men. There's some women in the room, but there's a number of men, and they were all talking. They were talking over me and having a conversation with each other when I was the one presenting this conversation. And it was frustrating. I kept trying to jump in and they just kept talking over me. And I finally said, look, guys, I have something to say, and we're not leaving this room until I finish what I'm saying. And we laughed, but they stopped. They got the hint and they let me finish what I was saying. So humor works too. And that's letting go of the emotion or the ego from what's happening to you, right? And just really recognizing this is part of the system, and they might not always realize what they're doing. Sometimes they do, but just taking yourself out of that emotionally and then just addressing it.
Well, that was my next question, Kae. How do you take yourself out of it emotionally? Because it has the likelihood to sit there and you're just sitting there getting pissed, not you, but getting pissed about it. You're like, what's going on? It's uncomfortable. You got to say something, but you don't know what to say. So do you have any practices you use to take yourself kind of to zoom out a little bit and get it back on track?
We're not great at that every time, right? There's times where it is going to really irritate us. And you can say that. Like you said, women are angry, men are passionate. You can say, look, I'm going to speak about this passionately for a moment. You don't have to yell, shout, you just say it, right? Or this is really irritating me, guys. Let's, but the way I think when I recognized that it continues to happen, it's a pattern, and I recognize it's part of the system, and it's more about them than me, it allowed me just to, I actually kind of find it quite fascinating, like really watching the dynamics in a room. And it's almost like I pull myself out of the room. Easier when you're remote than when you're in the room, I will say that. But pulling myself away from that, like almost feeling like I'm physically not in the room, but I'm in the room. It allows me to separate my emotions from what's happening and the way I can respond.
Yeah, you're looking at it like an observer, right? You're like,
yes, you have to look at it as, don't let your own ego get in the way, right? Don't let them affect your behavior and your ego. It is about them. They're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. It's not about you. It's not a reflection on you at all. And if you remember that, you can take the emotion out of it and have those conversations very calmly.
Yeah, because I could see it leading to a lot of doubt for a woman who maybe is new to the leadership team, let's just say. And you're going, oh, it can affect your confidence because you're saying, I guess I'm not saying anything important, right? Like, I could see that really turning into some self-doubt if you don't just nip it in the bud.
Yeah. And I think the beginning story in my book, I talk about this woman who was being talked over in a board meeting. Like they just were explaining everything that she was trying to say, and everybody's, talking over, especially the CEO. And after the meeting, she said, "What am I doing wrong? Why aren't they doing that to you?" And I said, "Well, they did try and do it to me, but I will not allow it typically." But, and I started to address her the way that, we tend to say, well, you need to be more confident in what you're saying, or, giving her these. And I finally said, "You're not doing anything wrong. It's them."
Yeah, validation matters.
Yeah, it's their behavior. Don't doubt. This was a very intelligent woman. She knew her business well, like really smart, probably one of the smartest people in the whole room. And she was doubting herself because of the way they behaved. And we can't do that. We have to recognize it's their behavior, not ours.
Right. And being able to have, I'm assuming she came to you. I can't remember the exact nuance. So she came to you and you validated that, no, it's not you. Right. I think that is amazing to have that kind of support, because you don't always have it if you're the only woman in the room. So to be able to have that and be able to support women, which brings me to, I've never heard this. I know with this concept of heap eating. Oh. I've never knew it was, I knew it was a thing, but not with an actual name. Yes. But talk about heap eating and then the amplification as a solution, because I thought that was brilliant.
Yes. I didn't know the term either. I mean, I was writing about it because it's happened so many times. Yeah. But then as I started to do research, I'm like, oh, there's actually a term for this, which is kind of sad, which shows you how often it happens, right? So heap eating is when a woman shares an idea in the meeting and you get they kind of move on. And then a couple minutes later, a man says almost exactly the same thing you said, and they run with that idea. They think that is a brilliant idea. That's heap eating. And the problem with that, let's talk about the problem, and then I'll talk about how to fix it. The problem with that, we can say, oh, not a big deal. I'm going to let it go this time. But the problem is you're being devalued in that room, because now the other person got credit for that idea. And when it comes time for promotion, guess who's getting the promotion? The person who has the ideas, right? So we can't ignore it. We have to call it out. Now, here's a way to avoid that happening. And this is something that I think it was in Obama's administration, the women in his office decided to do this amplification when it happened, because it would happen to them a lot. But it is the right way to approach this. So when you give an idea, you had reasons for providing that idea. Don't just state the idea. So for example, I'm in a meeting and I say, I think we should have quarterly reviews with our customers. you could just say that, and then somebody else could take it and they would get credit for it. But if you say, I really think we should have quarterly reviews for our customers because it will allow us to engage with them on a quarterly basis and understand if the product is delivering the value that they intended for it to, and we can help them with their transformational journey with this product. It will allow for better retention of our customers. That's harder to pull away because you just made this whole statement of why this is important to the business. It's harder for someone to snatch that from you. That's amplification. So state the idea, but give the reasons for your idea. And it doesn't have to be this data because you're brainstorming in a meeting, you're just coming up with an idea. So you might not have data, but there's a reason that you suggested that idea. State the reason why you think it's beneficial to the business. And that will help with heating.
That's brilliant. I mean, because you would just throw something out there, right? But I guess it is a little bit of preparing that whole thing. Like, it's not just this, but it's like, here's the details behind it.
And we have to do that as women because we don't walk in with immediate credibility. I call it street cred. We don't have immediate street cred. Men do. And men says something and everyone's like, wow, yep, exactly. We should do that. We say that and we get questioned more than men do about an idea.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What's the, because we've talked about women, but what is the additional burden of a woman of color? Because that's even fewer that you're likely to see anyone of color as you go up. And like I said, it's getting worse and worse. But what is the additional kind of, I'll say it's a burden. I don't know if that's the right word that you're carrying.
There is a burden there for anyone of color, certainly women of color. We come to work arming ourselves, waiting for that slight, that racial slur or comment, or that microaggression, or being ignored or looked down upon, because it's happened to us in our lives and it does happen at work. And so there is that additional burden. It's not just the sexist things that women deal with. Now we have to deal with this racial bias. And there's times in my career where things happen and it's like, was that a racist thing or was that a sexist thing? I can't tell you know what I mean? I can't, why are they treating me this way? Why are they singling me out? Or why are they trying very hard to make me aware that I don't fit in, or try and make me feel like I don't fit in? So that's the additional burden for women of color. We have more bias against us. We have more stereotypes of our abilities. We're not as smart as white people. We're not as smart as white women. We don't work as hard, right? Like, we have to overcome that and the sexual bias.
Yeah. And I laughed. It's fun. It's not funny at all, but it's like so absurd. You're like, all of that to handle. You're just trying to do your damn job.
Right.
Like, I'm just trying to do my job.
It's funny, Jen, so many women that I talk to, that's what they say. Like, I just want to come to work and do my job. That's it. I don't want all this other, barriers and dynamics that I have to maneuver through. I just want to come in and do my job like men get to do. Right.
It's an amazing emotional labor load that you have going in there every day. And I do want to ask this because if you are the only woman in the room, that's one piece. There's going to be that doubt there. But especially chances are you're going to be the only woman of color in the room. So how do you find people who get it? Because I can imagine you can say something to a white woman and she's not going to get it as much, right? Because she just hasn't been through that level of complexity of bias. So what do you do? How do you find people to help just get some of that emotional labor off your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, most of my career, I've been the only female in these executive rooms, and certainly the only person of color in the room. And you need allyship outside of the room, right? You have to build strong networks internally in the company for sure, but also externally, because you need to be able to go and talk to people and say, this just happened to me. And you want somebody to say, that wasn't okay, right? Yes, it did happen to you. You want them to acknowledge that it did happen to you and that it wasn't okay. And there are people in those rooms. You can find people in those rooms, men too, who are your allies. Mm-hmm. And so that's helpful, right? My last company, there were men in the room that I know they didn't agree with, racial bias or, gender bias in any way. So it made me feel more comfortable in those rooms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Having those relationships helps because this is what's said about you after the meeting, but it's also who's going to amplify you during the meeting as well, right? And having those people that are going to be your allies, extremely helpful.
Yeah. And having those relationships, building those one-on-one relationships, because women, we have to build relationships differently than men because they get to network, they're more comfortable networking with each other after hours or in the hallway or whatever. So I found that I had to build one-on-one relationships with people, but it helped to gain credibility with somebody, and it breaks down some of the bias that they may have about me as a female or as a female of color. And then you find that they're advocating for you in those rooms more because they know you just as a person who's working hard and is intelligent and is a great leader, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And once you get someone to know someone personally, I find that just opens up the relationship. I know we're talking about work, but we're all human to get to, and there's always something you have in common with someone. I don't care who you are. There's something you can create a relationship on.
Yes.
Well, Kae, how do you know when you should stick it out and when you're just like, this just isn't for me anymore. I cannot do this.
Yeah, I talk about that in the book, certainly, because there are things you have to consider. I always tell people, think about your financial situation as well, because some people just want to leave and jump, but then you're hurting yourself financially, and you got to be careful about doing that. So that's one consideration that you have to have. But it really is around how toxic is that environment, number one. If you're going to work every day and just filled with this emotional toll from this toxicity and a lot of bias and discrimination happening to you, that might not be the best place for you to work, right? There was one company that I worked every day. I drove in and said, I can't wait for it to be the last day that I have to drive in here. If you're saying that every day on your drive to work, that is not a great place to work, right? If you're struggling every day to come in and not enjoying it, that's probably not a great environment for you to work in. If you're not advancing and you want to advance, you may want to consider leaving as well, right? You're the CEO of your career. I always look at opportunities as how is this going to help me get to my vision and my goal for my career? What am I going to get out of this company? And I will stay there as long as that is serving that purpose. Mm-hmm. As soon as it isn't, then I'm going somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
If you can advance and you can affect change, because I always try and help change a culture. And there's times where I have been successful helping companies change cultures. And there's times where I recognize this is never going to change. And I've had to leave, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to double down on those 2 points you made is own your career, know what you want, and be kind of brutal, if you will, to say that's what I want. Am I actually getting those? Because I think if you have those, it's facts, not your feelings, right? Because there is a lot of emotional attachment to say, oh, but maybe it'll change. There's a lot of maybe it'll change. And out of the devil I know versus the devil I did. There's a lot of ways you can talk yourself into staying. Right. So I like that piece. And also concentrating on financial. What do you need? How can the company benefit you while you're there?
Right.
And getting your ducks in a row, if you will, financially.
Right. And I think that helps. You said it takes some of the emotion out of it when you look at it that way. Like I am helping serve this company, of course, right? They're paying me a salary and I'm helping to grow the company, but I'm getting something out of it as well. And I have my own plan. Mm-hmm. And this part of my career. Like it could be, I want global experience. Well, I'm getting that here. I may not be getting other parts of the things that I want, but I'm getting this global experience, and that's important for me for my next step. So I'm going to stay here as long as it's not toxic, extremely toxic, right? So those are the conversations you need to have with yourself. Those are the things you need to think through.
Yeah, life's too short, definitely, to be stuck in a place where you're driving to work every day and going, no, I can't wait for this to be my last day.
Yeah, but you know, at that point in my life, I needed that I needed that job financially. So I had to stay until I found somewhere else to go, you know, versus just quitting and hurting myself financially.
Well, I think it's having the plan, right? This isn't serving me. What can I do now to
Yes.
figure it out while I still have a job? It's the best time to look for a job, right? But have a plan around it. So
Yes.
Great advice. So, Kate, if you were able to mentor a young female tech worker, leader, an early leader over coffee tomorrow, what would you encourage that she start doing and stop doing?
Well, I always say you start with mastering your profession wherever you are at, and you have to keep up with your profession because that's creates the credibility. Showing value, tying what you're doing to a business outcome, like what impact are you affecting? And it can be at any level job, right? You can tie it to an outcome, a business outcome, and making that visible, what you're doing, like promoting your achievements is important for women. We don't always do that, right? And so that, I would say, do that. Build strong relationships internally and externally, not just within your department. You have to find, it's not just mentors, it's sponsors, but it's also people that are going to help you do your job well. And that isn't always just within that department. So building that network internally, certainly externally, as we said, and learning how to be a great collaborator, right, with other people, other groups, and a very clear communicator. Like starting to practice how to communicate very clearly and concisely, because that's not a skill that a ton of people have, I've noticed in business, right? And you just can cause friction, or you're delaying getting something done if you're not quite clear in what you're asking for or what your expectations are with people in business.
Yes, so much to say about that, because I'm going to ask you about what they should stop doing in a minute. But yes, I talk to new leaders, train new leaders all the time. And I'm like, when you talk to executives, you use a different language, right? You cannot ramble. It's direct. What are you trying to say? So it is this, you have to learn to get to the point, to make sure you express the value and tie it to why they need to listen. What does it benefit the business? And so 100% there. And then also the visibility and promotion. It is hard to do that. I'd have to say, that's not easy for me, but I've seen this one woman in my circle who promotes the hell out of herself. And I'm like, I need to do that. Like, you are doing amazing. So I'd like that you brought up visibility and promotion, because I think it is the tendency for early leaders and early female leaders just to keep their head down.
Yes, and do that, you know, execution work, not their strategic work. And a lot of times men are great at promoting themselves, or other men help promote men, right? Versus women. And I don't know that I'm great at promoting what I'm doing. I promote what my team does. I absolutely make sure I'm promoting what my team does in the right rooms. I mean, that's important. And part of that, then I benefit from that, right? Because I'm leading that team. We have to do it because we don't do it enough. And we need to promote it in a way that's strategic to the business, shows the impact to the business, the goals that the business is trying to achieve, right? It's not just task oriented.
Yeah. And what you just said is, when you're a leader, it's not about you, it's about your team. So that may be a more comfortable point for new leaders, new female leaders, to be like, it's not about me, it's about my team. How can I raise them up and give them visibility?
Right.
What about, what should they stop doing? What should they leave behind?
I think they should, I think stop doubting yourself is one thing they should stop doing. Stop doing work that is menial and is not benefiting your department, your position, your department, or the organization. We can tend to get into these lower level things because they're easier to get done. Stop working in a silo. Right? It's easy, especially when you're new and you're young, you may not feel comfortable branching out, talking and working with other departments. But if you do that, you get more visibility. That's where you get more sponsorship from people, because they're like, oh, Claire, she really works well with other departments. That's a leadership thing, right?
Yeah, because people talk. You always go out there and go, oh, how's so-and-so doing, right? It really makes a difference if someone can say, oh, Claire's great to work with. It's that kind of stuff.
And the other thing is, which I think we touched on earlier, is don't wait for people to manage your career. You manage your career. You make the decisions about your career, right? You decide where you're going. Don't wait for your boss to, decide if you're worthy of this promotion. Right? I worked in a company and I was at a director level. I was trying to be a senior director, and I saw other people around me that, why am I not at that same level? And it wasn't happening for me at that company. So I left and I went to another company, and I ended up being a VP, not a senior director, right? So some other company saw my value, where the company that I was at for a while, they lost that view of my value. And so that's something we have to recognize. And I could have stayed there and waited for somebody to say, 10 years or 5 years later, oh, now you're ready, right? You don't want somebody defining what your value is.
No, and I find that people don't even give feedback to say, hey, we really want you to be at the senior director level. You just need to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
It doesn't happen. So,
and then we have to be realistic, right? If I'm a senior manager and I want to be a VP, that might not be realistic. I want to be a VP in 6 months. So you have to be realistic about your experience and your strengths and weaknesses, but don't let anybody define. If you know that you are capable and you're doing that job anyway, and you're not getting that role, well, it's time to go to another department. Certainly have those conversations first, but if you're seeing it's not going to happen, time to go to another department or go to another company that does see your value, because you're stalling your career if you don't do that.
Yeah, that's good advice. Where can people find out more about you and potentially connect?
So on LinkedIn, certainly. But if you go to kaewilliams.com, that's Kae Williams.com, you can learn more about me, what I speak about, what I write about, certainly about my book. And in there's links to my social media, which is LinkedIn, Substack, and Instagram.
All right. Well, I'll link those up in the show notes. But Kae, before we close out today, is there anything you want to leave the listeners with? Maybe I didn't ask you, or any additional thoughts?
I want to leave the listeners with, especially women, I would love to leave them with the understanding that there are biases that we're facing in the workplace. Sometimes they're so subtle, so you have to be aware of them. Hopefully the book will help illuminate how they show up for you. And we have to start naming them and addressing them. And for leaders to understand that women have very different experiences in the rooms than men do.
Good parting thoughts. Kae, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Jen.